The Promise from Peru. On the evening of June 26, 2026, inside the Paul VI Audience Hall, more than 100 cardinals sat in silence as Pope Leo XIV rose to speak. He set aside his notes. What followed wasn't a prepared address, it was a story he had carried, unspoken, for nearly 4 decades. To understand why that story mattered, you have to go back to 1988, to a dusty bus stop in Trujillo, Peru. The young priest, Robert Francis Prevost, was 33 when his Augustinian order sent him to Peru, not as an administrator, but as an ordinary parish priest. The country was in the grip of internal conflict. Shining Path guerrillas controlled parts of the countryside. The military's response was often just as brutal. Car bombings, blackouts, and fear were part of daily life in many towns. In the middle of it, parish churches were often the only stable institution left standing. Prevost lived simply: a thin mattress, no air conditioning, meals shared with the villagers he served. He taught canon law by day and walked unpaved roads for miles to reach rural chapels by night, sitting with families who had lost sons to the violence. He wasn't shielded from any of it. By most accounts, he asked for the harder assignments rather than avoiding them. Carmen. One detail from those years is said to have stayed with him more than any other. After an evening mass in a village outside Trujillo, an older woman approached him, a textile worker who'd spent decades at the same machines, her hands scarred by the work. She told him simply, "Father, I have given my life to work, and my work has given me nothing. Not even my dignity." That night, alone in his small room, Prevost is said to have written something down. Not a prayer, but a private vow. If he ever held real authority within the church, he would make sure it never stayed silent while workers were stripped of their dignity. He folded the page and kept it in his Bible. It stayed there through his years running the worldwide Augustinian order, through his return to Peru as Bishop of Chiclayo, through his appointment as cardinal, and through the conclave that made him Pope in May 2025. A name with a meaning. When Prevost chose the name Leo, observers speculated about why. The explanation he later gave the cardinals connected it directly to Pope Leo XIII, author of the 1891 encyclical Rerum Novarum, the document that first articulated the Church's modern position on workers' rights during the Industrial Revolution. It wasn't just symbolic. On May 15, 2026, the anniversary of Rerum Novarum, Leo XIV signed his first encyclical Magnifica Humanitas. Rather than a broad statement on peace or unity, it was a pointed document about the human cost of automation and artificial intelligence. Workers displaced without retraining, corporations operating without accountability, and a warning that technology without ethics is not progress. It is a new form of oppression. The response split sharply. Labor groups across Latin America and Europe welcomed it as a landmark statement. In corporate and financial circles, the reaction was colder. Reports circulated of a senior banking executive requesting a private audience with the Pope to argue the encyclical's language on corporate accountability was too aggressive. According to accounts from people close to the meeting, Leo's answer was brief. The Church wasn't for sale. Bruce, the consistory. The real turning point came at an extraordinary consistory on June 26th and 27th. Called by Leo himself under the official banner of discussing peace, synodality, and the state of the world. But he had a fourth item prepared privately. After a presentation from Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez on institutional responsibility, Leo left the podium, stood at the center of the hall, and told the assembled cardinals about Peru, about the war, the walking, and the woman whose hands had been ruined by machine work. Then he announced something concrete, a new pontifical commission for the protection of workers' dignity, with real funding and a direct mandate. Not a symbolic advisory body, but one empowered to investigate labor conditions in countries with major church presence, partner with international labor organizations, and issue binding recommendations to Catholic institutions on their own employment practices. The next day, he expanded the mandate further. The Commission would also examine the treatment of workers in the AI supply chain, the low-paid data labelers and content moderators in Nairobi, Manila, and Bogotá, who spend hours reviewing distressing material for a fraction of the profit the technology eventually generates. It was the first time a major religious leader had addressed that specific labor issue, directly and publicly. The reaction. The backlash arrived quickly. Anonymous tech executives dismissed the move as regulatory overreach outside the Church's lane. Political figures weighed in publicly, arguing the Pope should focus on religious matters rather than corporate labor practices. The Vatican press office responded with a single line, understood to reflect Leo's own words. Defending human dignity and saving souls were not separate missions. Leo, by most accounts, doesn't respond to criticism directly, but reads all of it and treats it as confirmation rather than deterrent. The man behind the decision. Those close to Leo describe someone methodical rather than impulsive. A mathematics graduate of Villanova, trained in canon law in Rome, fluent in 5 languages, and shaped by 12 years leading the global Augustinian order across nearly 50 countries. The commission wasn't framed internally as a sudden reaction, but as the execution of something planned since before his election, including months of quiet, prior contact between his personal envoy and the International Labor Organization in Geneva, laying groundwork for a formal Vatican-ILO partnership expected to be announced later in the year. Closing the loop. On June 29th, the Feast of Saints Peter and Paul, Leo presided over Mass in St. Peter's Basilica. His homily made no mention of the Commission or Peru directly. Instead, he spoke about the Apostle Peter, chosen not for perfection, but for willingness, to try, to fail, and to keep going anyway. Afterward, back in his study, Leo is reported to have written a private letter, addressed to Carmen, the woman he never named publicly and whose fate remains unknown. He is said to have written that he had kept his promise, even if it took nearly 40 years, and that he intended to keep working until every worker, everywhere, was treated with the dignity the promise had been written for. The Commission's formal establishment was expected in July, with its first investigations beginning in the following months. The practical follow-through to a vow first written in a small room in Peru, decades before anyone imagined that priest would one day lead the Catholic Church.